Hello, very good morning and welcome to Sky News Breakfast. Hospitals are bracing themselves for what NHS England warns will be exceptionally low staffing in some regions as nurses go on strike from 8 o'clock tonight. The Royal College of Nursing is pushing ahead with the bank holiday walkout after it and fellow union Unite voted against a government pay offer. Other unions, including Unison and the GMB, voted in favour. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, released a statement last night, and part of it says it's hugely disappointing some unions are escalating strike action this week, including the RCN, despite only a third of its members rejecting the government's fair and reasonable offer on pay, which other unions accepted. The RCN's decision not to provide any national exemptions from strike action, including for emergency and cancer care, also risks patient safety, though I welcome the fact a number of local mitigations have been agreed for critical services. Well, meanwhile, Pat Cullen, General Secretary of the RCN, said this morning. The government wants to bring NHS strike action to a close this coming week, but with several big unions and nursing as the largest part of the NHS still in dispute, it has to do better. So that's Pat Cullen of the RCN. That's what she said this morning. Well, let's bring in Sky's Shaman Freeman-Powell, who's here with us now. So this latest strike by nurses gets underway, as we say, at 8 o'clock tonight. How much concern is there about the disruption to patients, but also fears about patient safety as well?
Well, there's lots of concern. Actually, NHS bosses are urging members of the public to use the health service wisely over the bank holiday whilst this strike action takes place. So it probably is a good idea for people not to do anything too wild over this weekend that may land themselves in hospital, because this strike action will impact half of England's hospitals. It will also impact mental health services and community services too. And for the first time, actually, it's likely to impact intensive care as well. And that's because, unlike previous strike action, the Royal College of Nurses haven't made any national exemptions. But like you just alluded to, they have made some local exemptions, which has been welcomed by NHS bosses. But they are still warning that the impact to patient care could be significant, which is what the NHS England's medical director told us earlier on.
Nurses are 25% of the NHS workforce, so they are a very significant part of our workforce, and it is very difficult to manage services without them. Now, I know that the public have heard on a number of occasions are saying that this is one of the most significant periods of industrial action for us in the NHS, but I do want to emphasise that this is significant.
So that was NHS England's medical director explaining how significant this strike action will be and the impact it's likely to have on patients. Of course, nurses will argue that this is the reason they're striking to begin with, because of poor working conditions, which has been caused in part by low pay, which is what they will argue. But this is obviously against the backdrop of an already struggling NHS trying to catch up with millions of appointments that have been cancelled over recent years. And of course, more appointments are likely to be cancelled as a result of continuing strike action. However, despite the impact to the NHS, the bosses are still asking members of the public to continue using 999 if it is a life-threatening situation.
OK, Shaman, thanks very much indeed. And just to let you know that the Royal College of Nursing boss, Pat Cullen, is one of the guests coming up on Sophy Ridge on Sunday. That's at 8:30 this morning. Now, the last UK evacuation flight left Sudan last night, ending an operation that's brought nearly 2,000 people out of the country as it teeters on the brink of civil war. Most are British nationals and their dependents, though there was a last-minute decision to also allow NHS doctors without British passports to board the final flights. The Foreign Office said the operation was the largest evacuation of any Western nation from the country. Well, thousands more have fled the fighting, not only by air, but also by water and land. Countries, including the UK, Germany, France, Canada and the Netherlands, have flown nationals from the Wadi Saidna airfield just north of Khartoum. In total, Britain has evacuated 1,888 people, with the majority flying to Cyprus and then on to the UK. Those who couldn't fly to safety have been seeking refuge by crossing Sudan's land borders. More than 20,000 people have fled into Chad, where authorities have voiced concerns over what that could do to the neighbouring country's stability. Egypt has seen more than 16,000 people enter from its southern border with Sudan, while more than 14,000 people have entered South Sudan to escape the violence. Smaller numbers have also travelled to the Central African Republic and to Ethiopia. And ferries and naval vessels have been transporting people to Jeddah in Saudi Arabia from Port Sudan, from where our Africa correspondent Yusra Elbagir sent this report.
In the shadow of an old British colonial building is a new British effort. After mass complaints of inaction, UK consular support is now underway, and their base has shifted from the heart of the conflict in the capital to Port Sudan.
I mean, at a first glance, it doesn't look great. It's a bit chaotic, but it is a much better option than what's out there. These people have traveled a long way, and they get some water, supplies, and an opportunity to potentially leave on an evacuation mission of foreign nationals and people who have documentation to go abroad.
The Foreign Office has advised British nationals to come here if they need help leaving Sudan, as unscheduled chartered ships arrive from Saudi Arabia to evacuate foreigners. Some have departed and others patiently wait, hoping to qualify.
If you have, a foreign passport or any thing that will actually give you the chance to go outside, you will take it. And this is why everybody here is doing his best to go out of Sudan.
And what about people who don't have American passports? Your family, your friends?
I feel sorry for them, because the situation is not good. I wish if they could have this, documents so they can leave, because, it's terrible there.
People are drained from the shock, not only of violence, but abrupt separation.
Who would you have brought with you here if you could?
My whole family, technically. Sometimes I just feel like when I'm leaving, I feel like a traitor to my country. I'm leaving them in all this pain while I'm going to go and have joy. I feel like sometimes you feel like a traitor for doing that. I don't know why.
Across town, more people wait, exposed to the searing heat with little support.
We want to go back because every person here is no have money. No, you can say sleep out on the out areas, not in the hotels, not in the all people sleeping on the roads. Location, the cleaning and everything. That's a good.
The quality of the waiting room varies by passport, just like the chances of evacuation. A lottery for a better life that starts at birth. Yusra Elbagir, Sky News, Port Sudan.
And Yusra joins me now from Port Sudan. So what's the latest situation there, Yusra? How's it looking there?
I mean, people here are still scrambling to evacuate. Some have been given the opportunity, some haven't. There is a lot of organizing on a community level. People are giving out food and supplies, but they're very limited. There's really no humanitarian response presence on the ground. We haven't seen the United Nations on the ground. We haven't seen any other of the international NGOs that operate in Sudan actually giving people shelter. The shelter that we saw at the port yesterday, protecting people from scorching sun, 40-degree heat, was actually a community initiative. So people here do feel abandoned. This is a feeling that they've had for a while as UN-led mediation failed between the two generals that we have seen now destroy the capital. Those that do get to leave seem to be those that have foreign passports. Some of them have been collecting in certain areas, and there are still lots of foreign nationals that haven't been able to get on a ship, that haven't been able to get on a plane, and instead have gotten on a bus to the border to Egypt. So there have been people that have been left behind by embassies and governments of foreign countries. We actually, last night, were taken to a building that had been booked entirely by the United Nations, incredibly beautiful building, and people here are asking, why is the United Nations not offering temporary shelter at the very least for the people that have fled this conflict? The numbers now are looking at least 75,000 people displaced so far, and the conflict is still ongoing. Every ceasefire that we have heard be announced has only partially held in the capital. Fighting has still continued. Hospitals are shutting down. A MSF-supported hospital was actually attacked and destroyed. And there are many other situations like this. So the question is, when will the international community respond in any sort of way? I'm not saying adequately, I'm not saying on a mass scale, I'm saying just respond to people here. The evacuations have been led by countries eager to get their citizens out, and even then, the British government has been criticised for its delayed response. But we are yet to see an adequate response on the ground that is supporting people through this crisis.
Yusra, thanks very much indeed. Well, the former Sudanese Prime Minister, Abdallah Hamdok, says a full civil war would be a nightmare for the world. He spoke at a conference in Kenya as fighting continues to puncture a fragile ceasefire. He said it's effectively a conflict between two armies which are both well-armed and well-trained. Now, millions watching next weekend's coronation will be invited to swear allegiance to the king out loud, with the public being offered an active role in the ceremony for the first time. The homage of the people will replace the homage of the peers, who traditionally kneel and make a pledge to the monarch in person. Well, people will be asked to say this: "I swear that I will pay true allegiance to your majesty and to your heirs and successors according to the law. So help me God." Well, the pledge is among several new details of King Charles's coronation, including the liturgy, the prayers and actions of the service. It will have the theme "Called to Serve," and representatives from the nation's faith communities will play an active role in the coronation. Also, in a break with tradition, Camilla will be anointed as Queen in full public view. And a reminder that we have a special and exclusive augmented reality web experience of The Crown to show you. It's been launched on the Sky News app on your mobile phones and essentially puts a life-size crown for you to look at in detail. And you can have a go yourself by scanning the QR code on your mobile phone. Well, our royal commentator, Alistair Bruce, has given it a try.
For the first time, you can experience the crown in your own home. Just press this button and it will materialise in front of you. And then you can walk around it, you can engage with it, and you will know as much as anyone else does about the crown that will be used at the coronation on the 6th of May.
Let's go back now to our top story. And nurses in England are due to stage walkouts from 8 p.m. tonight and through the bank holiday. Joining us now is the Chief Executive of NHS Employers and Deputy Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation, Danny Mortimer. Very good morning to you. So nurses will go on strike tonight for 28 hours. What impact do you expect that to have?
Well, the strike is taking place in half of the trusts in England. The RCN didn't have a successful mandate for strike action in the other half. We are expecting a significant impact. Thankfully, the RCN have agreed in a significant number of places to now put in place mitigations to allow staff who would otherwise be striking to work, and that's welcome indeed. It's happened later than NHS leaders would have liked, but it does provide some extra support. But I think this will be the strike that has the biggest impact of all the strikes we've seen in this last 6 months.
How concerned are you about patient safety?
There have been real concerns about the risk to patients in recent days. And as I said, the RCN have responded to the requests that have been made to them to encourage staff in certain areas, our areas caring for our sickest patients, our sickest children in particular. They have encouraged those otherwise striking nurses to commit to work during the period of the strike, and that's very welcome indeed, and that will make a difference. But we are very worried about the impact that's having, and we will see much lower levels of staffing than we would otherwise see, and that we've seen on previous strike days as well.
Give us an idea of what morale is like in the health service at the moment.
Well, clearly, as you've seen through the period of strike action, there are real concerns from NHS staff across all sorts of staff groups. Of course, that's been about the pay awards that have been made to NHS staff in recent years by the government. But it also, as your viewers will have seen, it also reflects a concern about what staff are seeing in relation to the care they can provide their patients. No one in the health service is happy about the waits that patients are having to experience across all sorts of services. The picture is different in different places and different departments, of course, but coming off the back of the pandemic, we are undoubtedly seeing real concerns amongst the people who work in the health service about the position they find themselves in. There are things that can make a difference in the longer term. The government is due to publish a workforce plan, we believe, a little bit later in May, and that will make a difference. That will give people working in the health service some hope that help is coming, and that the government is prepared to invest in increasing the numbers of people who are being trained to work in the health service.
In the meantime, health unions are split on whether to accept the government's pay offer, but it is likely that when there's an overall vote on it this week, the pay rise will get the backing. That's the likely outcome. So what do you think happens next? And what do you think that means for the prospect of future action by the unions that have rejected the pay offer, the RCN and Unite? What do you think that could mean for strike action in the months ahead?
The picture is a really complicated one, and of course we've still got a dispute between our junior doctors and the government as well. My organisation has said that it does wish that the RCN had waited until the position for other trade unions was clearer. The approach we take in the health service is a collective one for our non-medical pay. We work with all the unions. We recognise 12 or 13 unions across all our various staff groups. And as you said, the biggest union, Unison, have voted to accept the pay deal. So the picture is complicated. What we do know is that the RCN have to ballot again. Their mandate for strike action ends at midnight on Monday. They had planned to strike on Tuesday, but as we saw this week, a judge was very clear that the mandate had expired, that if nurses had gone on strike on Tuesday, the RCN would have placed them in a position outside of the law. So they have to ballot again. So we won't know the response and attitude of nurses if the pay award does go ahead and is paid in the spring and summer. OK, well, Danny Mortimer, we really appreciate your time this morning, Chief Executive of NHS Employers. Thanks very much indeed. Well, also this morning, the Labour leader has again defended his party's use of attack ads on Rishi Sunak, including one which suggests that the Prime Minister doesn't want convicted sex offenders jailed. So Keir Starmer was pressed about the adverts by Sky's Sophy Ridge.
Now, normally in interviews for this programme, I try and kind of look forward, but I just want to go back to something, if I may, because I think it's quite important. And if I'm being honest, I don't feel like you've been properly kind of questions about it. So at the beginning of April, Labour published an attack ad which had a picture of Rishi Sunak, and it said, "Do you think adults convicted of sexually assaulting children should go to prison? Rishi Sunak doesn't." Now, you've since said that you stand by every word of that, right?
Yes.
So do you, Keir Starmer, believe that Rishi Sunak thinks that paedophiles should not go to jail? Is that what you're saying?
The figures speak for themselves.
No, I'm not talking about the figures, because we're talking about what it says here in the ad. Do you think adults convicted of sexually assaulting children should go to prison? Rishi Sunak doesn't.
Yeah.
Is that what you think?
I think if he did think they should go to prison, he'd do something about it.
So you don't think he thinks paedophiles should go to prison? Is that what you're seriously saying?
I stand by the advert.
So that's what the advert says? Is that what you're seriously saying?
Yes. I think that as Prime Minister, you take responsibility for what happens in your criminal justice system. He's not taking responsibility for it. And this idea that somehow you can ship in a new Prime Minister, we've had 5 of them now in the last 13 years, and that somehow he doesn't bear responsibility. They have broken our criminal justice system. So it is unforgivable what they've done to our criminal justice system.
Do you take personal responsibility then for every child abuser who escaped prison while you were Director of Public Prosecutions?
I take full responsibility for every decision of the Crown Prosecution Service.
You can see that full interview on Sophy Ridge on Sunday. That's coming up at 8:30 this morning. In the meantime, some of the day's other headlines this morning, and cold calls which cheat people out of money by selling sham financial products will be banned under government plans to be announced next week. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, says fraudsters must be stopped from infiltrating their way into people's lives. The Guardian has apologised for a controversial cartoon of outgoing BBC chairman Richard Sharp, which was widely condemned as anti-Semitic. The cartoon was taken down from The Guardian's website with a message saying that it didn't meet their editorial standards. The artist, Martin Rowson, has also apologised for what he called his carelessness and thoughtlessness. Tens of thousands of protesters in Israel have maintained pressure over contentious judicial reforms with more mass demonstrations. The Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's governing coalition wants to diminish judges' ability to rule against the government or veto legislation. Mr. Netanyahu has delayed the reforms but is pushing ahead with them. A leading blood cancer charity is urging people from ethnic minorities to register as stem cell donors. Black and Asian people in particular are being called to come forward after a plunge in the number of overall donors. Alice Porter reports.
Antoinette, a mum of two, has incurable blood cancer. She's been looking for a stem cell donor for 9 years.
Myeloma has ruined my life. I've had to go through chemotherapy, 8 different types of chemotherapy throughout the years. Just before the pandemic, I gained 13 spinal fractures because the myeloma had spread to my spine. If someone came forward and they matched for me, although it wouldn't cure me, it would give me my best chances of survival. If I were to receive a match, I could have another 20 years, maybe plus.
People who are black, Asian or from an ethnic minority background have a 37% chance of finding the best possible stem cell donor match. But for people who are white, it's 72%, and campaigners want to change this inequality. Patients are mostly matched with a donor from the same ethnicity as themselves. The problem is fewer people come forward to register as a potential donor from ethnic minority backgrounds.
Within our community, there's been lots of myths and fears and taboos about giving something of yourself, triggered a lot by what's been done historically to the black race through hundreds of years, especially with clinical research. So what we've had to do is educate our community to get people to really appreciate that my ethnicity can be of a real assistance to someone.
After hearing a campaign on the radio to recruit more donors from ethnic minorities, Natasha joined the UK's stem cell register. 15 years later, she saved someone's life.
I remember getting the call to say that we think you're a match, which was incredible. So I was straight away, what do I need to do next? Like, get me there. I had the best nurses that I couldn't have been asked for more. They looked after you, they kept you informed with everything. To be honest, I'd do it tomorrow in a heartbeat. It was the best experience.
Antoinette continues to wait for her match, but time is running out. Alice Porter, Sky News.
A manhunt is underway for a 38-year-old suspect after a shooting in the Texas town of Cleveland. Police say Francisco Oropeza opened fire on neighbours after they asked him to stop firing rounds in his yard. Sky's US correspondent Mark Stone has the latest.
Well, beyond the tragedy of every mass shooting here in the United States, there are always particular and peculiar details with each one. And in this case, the details are utterly horrific. It was 11:30 on Friday night. A family had complained to their neighbour that he was being too loud because he was firing his AR-15 assault-style rifle in his front yard, and they were trying to get their baby to go to sleep. He, according to the Sheriff's Department, responded by saying, "I'll do what I like in my front yard." He then went into their house, inside, and opened fire. He shot 5 people. 4 of them died where they were shot. The 5th, an 8-year-old child, was later taken to hospital, where they later died. The Sheriff's Department has said that the shootings were almost execution style in their nature. It gets worse still because 3 more children were taken to hospital covered in blood. They were not injured physically, but mentally, goodness knows how injured they are, because they were discovered underneath the bodies of 2 of the women that were shot in the house. So 5 people in total shot. Utterly horrific details. This is the 175th mass shooting in the United States this year, and we are only just approaching the end of April.
Joe Biden has spoken at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, an evening known for politicians and journalists making fun of each other. But it had a serious side as the president called for the release of the Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, who's detained in Russia accused of spying, which he denies. He also spoke about Austin Tice, who disappeared while reporting in Syria more than a decade ago.
Tonight, our message is this: journalism is not a crime. Evan and Austin should be released immediately, along with every other American held hostage or wrongfully detained abroad. But I want them and their families to know, Jill and I understand, we see them. They are not forgotten. And I promise you, I am working like hell to get them home.
But the president didn't pass up opportunities to make some jokes, including about his own age.
You say I'm ancient. I say I'm wise. You say I'm over the hill. Don Lemon would say that's a man in his prime. I'm going to turn this over to Roy. Roy, the podium is yours. I'm going to be fine with your jokes, but I'm not sure about Dark Brandon.
Now, Alan Rickman is being celebrated by Google today, marking 36 years since one of his first leading theatre performances. The late actor opened his Broadway performance as the anti-hero Le Vicomte de Valmont in the production of Les Liaisons Dangereuses in 1987. A year later, he became more famous for his villainous role in the action film Die Hard, before going on to play Professor Snape in Harry Potter. He died in 2016, aged 69. Still to come here on Sky News Breakfast, the business secretary gets support for her so-called war on woke, and Liz Truss in a row over missing bathrobes. We'll be taking a look at what's making the news in the Sunday papers. Time now to take another look at the Sunday papers. Here with us to review them this morning are the broadcaster and journalist Thomas Copeland and the entrepreneur Kate Hardcastle. So welcome back to both of you. And Kate, we're kicking off with you this time around, and a story in the Sunday Telegraph about John Lewis. So talk us through it.
Well, the story focuses on the fact that because it suggests of people working from home, or therefore head office workers who might not have those in-store roles, preferring to have a hybrid existence between the office and working from home, that the store is, the business is looking to reduce down that very famous London HQ. But there's more to this than meets the eye. John Lewis has become probably one of the challenge brands in retail now that really the media particularly are looking to as we commentators on what's happening there, and is it relevant, is it retrospective of what's going on with the way that consumers buy. It's a brand that was much loved, still is really, but has certainly come out of favour with a lot of buyers. It's had a lot of challenges of late, starting the year with 2% down and saying that it wouldn't be paying the usual bonus, which a lot of staff there depend on. So a brand going through much evolution. We've heard talk from the chair, Dame Sharon White, about how she sees this moving to a brand that's representative and has more leaning into finance offers, banking offers, even home rentals. But the main retail organisation certainly needs to get better and heal and become progressive and relevant to a consumer that we see today, with, of course, a huge amount of competition in the marketplace. So it's interesting that, yes, we will start to see a lot of those big HQs in London start to move and evolve, just as we've seen the footholding of retail organisations become smaller on high streets, because it's about the quality of offer, not just the quantity.
Yeah, it's so interesting how retail is going to have to adapt to cost of living crisis and high rents on the high street and people working from home. There's so many challenges, aren't there? Really interesting to see what direction that takes us in. Let's move on to The Observer, shall we, Thomas? Because there's an article about Andrew Tate and how much schools discuss him in The Observer. So what are they saying there?
The government's decided to weigh on this a little bit. The Department for Education advising some schools that they shouldn't be talking about Andrew Tate. For people who don't know, Andrew Tate's an influencer, I suppose, is pretty unique in the scale of the influence that he's managed to amass over a relatively short period of time. He's sort of labelled the king of toxic masculinity, talks a lot about and has had some real influence over young people, especially young boys. In this article, it pretty much catalogues case after case of a horrendous example of young boys behaving really inappropriately towards young girls in their schools, often pretty categorically quoting or inspired by Andrew Tate. Many instances in here not repeatable on air, and cases and reports to charities and to the government of misogyny and sexual harassment in schools going up. So the Department of Education at the moment is saying, we advise that schools do not talk about Andrew Tate. Their concern is that he will become promoted as a consequence of talking about him more. Not entirely sure. I mean, I think there's room for disagreement there. There's probably the case that if you don't address this stuff in schools head on, it will fester. It needs to be addressed properly. And actually, if you don't have teachers who are prepared to have these difficult conversations, then Andrew Tate, he will not be the last of this kind of influencer. He's unique. I'm afraid to say, there are young men my age that I have seen certainly be influenced by the videos that he puts out, posting them or saying stuff like, oh, well, he's got a point here, and buying into some of it when you know that they buy into all of it. And that's concerning. And I'm 24 years old, and think about what kind of influence you're going to have on young boys who are 9, 10, 11, 12, when they're early teens. You're at a very impressionable time in your life anyway. So I think it's probably the case that the department is going to need to come up with something more robust than just don't talk about it, push it away, because it's not going to go away, and there will be more Andrew Tates in the future.
Yeah, and interesting in this article, they talk about pupils saying, my dad likes him, though, and the dads coming in and defending their children over it. So a challenge for teachers there as well. Let's move on, Kate, to an article in the Sunday Express about social housing. What are they talking about here?
They're talking about the lack of it. And really, when we look at all those front pages today talking about the nuances of the coronation, we think about the real state of the nation. This is one of the most challenging sets of figures you'll read today. The fact that 9 out of 10 councils, local authorities fail to build properties that are required, that are needed for social housing. We know that when the Conservatives came in, there was a huge pledge to change this, of all this in 2019, and that's been certainly watered down over recent years. But we just have this ridiculous situation. We've got people that can't get on the property ladder. I think there needs to be huge reform when it comes to things like mortgages, people paying so much in rent they can't even begin to save deposits for housing. And then we've got people who are desperately trying to get into social housing, and we're not building any. So when Keir Starmer starts to talk about this is an area where we need reform, this is an area we need change, you can't help to think that might be certainly pricking the ears of so many that will be looking to him to perhaps be our next leader for bringing the Labour Party in, if they're going to deliver on this. What I really worry about is every time we read these figures, behind them are millions of people in absolute misery who are in housing that's just not adequate or suitable, who cannot find a way forward or out of the situation they're in. And many, many of them actually earning enough to be able to buy a reasonable property, but just not being able to get there because the system financially will not permit them to do so, because the deposits required and the repayment required and the way they've got to meet the financial benchmark that's required. It's just an awful, abhorrent state of affairs.
And Kate, what would you pin the reason why it's not happening down to one thing? I mean, to what extent is it the case that people generally might say, yeah, we need more housing, but they don't actually want it built in their area? Is that one of the problems, one of the ways that there's resistance, do you think, Kate?
It doesn't seem that it's just one thing at all. It's to do with multiple housing ownership. It's to do with the costs. It's to do with as you say, the land and sign off of the local councils, and not to bully the local councils as well, who've been through 3 years of just trying to do all they can to keep local place going, schools, etc., with dealing with everything from COVID onwards. So no, I think it is, as we say, that perfect storm of issues, but we need governments in place that are actually going to focus on this. You can't do much in life if you don't have solid foundations of at least a home to be able to set off from and try and build the life you want to build.
OK, yes, and lots of challenges, people renting as well and finding properties and prices going up. Lots of challenges around housing, aren't there? Let's move on to the Sunday Telegraph, Thomas. Their main story today is Kemi Badenoch getting some support, it says here, in her war on wokery. Who's she getting it from?
Well, interestingly, the Sunday Telegraph have sort of the coronation is on the front page, but they're running with this from Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, likely presidential hopeful. They've managed to bag an exclusive interview with him. It's 2 pages long, well worth a read. Couple of things jump out. One of them, he came to the UK as part of a multi-state visit, sort of trying to advertise Floridian exports and business around the world. He was in Japan and the UK at the end of his trip and elsewhere. He talked to James Cleverly, Foreign Secretary, and then the Trade and Business Secretary. And that was when this kind of line that they're running with at the start is, the war on wokery. And commending the Trade Secretary on that basis. Ron DeSantis has made a bit of a name for himself on this kind of war on woke thing. He's been relatively controversial in the States over stuff like banning or limiting what schools can teach pupils about issues of gender. He's taken on Disney and Disneyland down in Florida over similar issues. Not dissimilar to that, Kemi Badenoch in the UK has had a bit of a fight against the likes of gender-neutral toilets, the likes of decolonising the curriculum. So it was always going to be an area of agreement. There are a couple of really, lines that maybe surprise you. The Trade and Business Secretary apparently told the Florida governor that actually some of this was basically America's fault and that this cancel culture had emerged and had been an import from the United States, and he said that he was inclined to agree with that. So it was an interesting debate, probably on both sides of that, and an interesting conversation to be having between the two of them. The other thing that Ron DeSantis is going to could be a really significant international figure. He didn't meet with Rishi Sunak for pretty obvious reasons. If he decides to enter the presidential race, he's going to have a horrifically bitter battle against Donald Trump, who certainly has the majority, the weight of support within his party at the moment, and he would probably be the expected candidate. But Ron DeSantis, could be huge, or we might forget him about him.
Indeed. It'll be interesting to see where that one goes. Anyway, we are out of time, both of you. Lovely to see you both this morning. And a reminder, there's loads about the coronation on the front pages as well, which we dealt with in the last app. But lovely to see you both, Kate and Thomas. Thanks very much indeed.